10 years ago, Lucas Reed fell for a girl he never dared to speak to. Ava Bennett. Brilliant, warm, the kind of woman who made every room brighter. Back then, she was focused on her future, and he was just another face in the crowd, but he never forgot her. Now fate brought her back into his life, not as a classmate, but as his assistant. She'd married a man who seemed perfect, until the truth showed up in bruises and broken promises. After the divorce, she started over, working quietly in an office she never imagined would belong to the man who once adored her. Lucas had everything: power, money, control, except the courage to tell her he still loved her. And when her dangerous past returned to haunt her, he knew one thing for sure: this time, he wouldn't let her face it alone. In college, Lucas Reed was the kind of guy you'd forget after class. Quiet, focused, always in the back row, but he remembered her. Ava Bennett, the girl who laughed too loud, borrowed pens she never returned, and somehow made statistics sound poetic. He never had the courage to say a word to her. Every time she smiled, his logic fell apart, just enough to remind him he was human. He watched her from a distance, convincing himself it wasn't obsession, just admiration. Everyone liked Ava. Professors, classmates, even the cafeteria lady, who saved her an extra cookie. Lucas liked her differently. He studied the way she brushed her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. He memorized how she bit her lip before answering a question. He told himself she'd never notice someone like him, the quiet guy with top grades but no stories to tell. She belonged to another world, the kind filled with noise and confidence. He tried to move on, burying the secret crush under deadlines and distractions, but sometimes when the classroom emptied, he'd linger just to look at the chair where she sat. Graduation came fast, cruel in its finality. People cheered, hugged, and promised to stay in touch. Lucas watched her leave the campus with a group of friends, sunlight catching her hair one last time. That was the day he swore he'd never see her again, and the day he realized some goodbyes echo longer than they should. Years later, Lucas didn't expect her name on the candidate list. He thought it was coincidence, another Ava Bennett, surely. But when she walked into his office, time folded in on itself. Same voice, same calm confidence, same eyes that once looked right through him, except now there was a ring on her finger. He hid his shock behind that CEO composure he'd mastered over the years. "Ms. Bennett, please have a seat," he said, pretending to glance at her resume instead of her face. She smiled politely, unaware that he already knew everything about her, or at least everything he once could from across a classroom. The years had been kind to her, maybe too kind. As she spoke, he noticed the rhythm of her voice, steady, practiced, almost rehearsed, the kind of tone people use when they've learned to hide exhaustion. She was married now, her words laced with practiced optimism. Every time she mentioned "we," something inside him recoiled, a quiet reminder that she belonged to someone else. By the time the interview ended, he'd convinced himself it was fine. He was her boss now, not some college kid with a quiet heartache. When she shook his hand to leave, her ring caught the light, and he felt the past slam into the present. The moment she walked out, he realized he'd forgotten how to breathe again. Her wedding ring glimmered under the fluorescent light as she signed the contract. It was a small thing, elegant and simple, but it burned in his vision like a warning. Lucas leaned back in his chair, pretending to review her paperwork. "Welcome to Reed Industries," he said evenly, though his voice carried a weight he couldn't quite hide. Ava smiled, that same effortless warmth he remembered from years ago. "Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm excited to start." He wanted to tell her she'd already started something far more complicated. Instead, he nodded, keeping his distance, holding his breath until she left the room. The door closed softly, but the silence that followed felt louder than it should. He stared at the ring long after she was gone, a symbol of belonging, of someone else's world where he had no place. He had built his empire with discipline, precision, and distance, the same distance now turning against him. He had power, but not over the one thing he wanted to forget. For the first time in years, control didn't feel like strength. It felt like punishment. He closed the folder, forced his focus back to numbers and reports, but her voice lingered, steady, bright, echoing from a past that refused to die quietly. He told himself it didn't matter. It never helped. Lucas built walls for a living, contracts, policies, decisions made behind glass doors. Keeping distance was easy. It was what made him good at his job. But with Ava, every rule felt harder to follow. She was sunshine in grey spaces, and he hated that it mattered. So he made sure every word between them stayed short, efficient, safe. "Morning, Mr. Reed," she'd say, passing his office. "Morning," he'd reply, eyes fixed on his screen, pretending not to notice the scent of her perfume, the same one she used back in college. It was maddening how time folded so easily around her. The sound of her laughter in the break room became a quiet distraction he couldn't silence. During meetings, she'd ask sharp questions that impressed the entire board. He'd nod, offering calm approval, but never more. Their eyes would meet across the table for a second too long before one of them looked away. There was no line crossed, not yet, but the tension hummed like a live wire under the surface. Some nights when everyone else had left, he'd still see her light on through the glass wall separating their offices. He'd tell himself he was just checking if the staff was gone, but deep down, he knew better. The distance he'd built was starting to feel less like protection and more like a punishment of his own making. It started with small things, things only someone who truly watched would notice. Ava no longer hummed while she worked. Her jokes grew shorter, and her coffee breaks became longer but quieter. She smiled when spoken to, but it never reached her eyes. Lucas caught himself studying her reflection in the glass more than her reports. Something was changing, and it wasn't the workload. He told himself not to get involved. "She's married," he reminded his reflection one night after she'd left. But even he heard the lie in his voice. Her wedding ring had lost its shine, like it hadn't been cleaned in months. Maybe it was nothing, but Lucas had never been good at pretending not to care. When she stayed late, he made excuses to walk by her desk. "Still here?" he'd ask casually. She'd smile faintly. "Deadlines," she'd say, fingers flying over the keyboard. He'd linger just long enough to make sure she wasn't crying, then disappear again before she noticed. The protective boss routine was becoming harder to disguise. He saw the way she flinched when her phone lit up with a call she didn't answer. Once she muttered "wrong number," but her voice cracked just slightly. Lucas said nothing. He wasn't her friend, her family, or her savior. But in that moment, he wanted to be all three. Over the next few months, Ava changed in ways that only silence could explain. Her confidence slipped through the cracks of every conversation. She arrived earlier, left later, avoided eye contact when someone asked about home. The woman who once filled a room with light now seemed to shrink into corners that felt safe. Lucas noticed and hated that no one else did. One morning, she came in wearing long sleeves on one of the warmest days of spring. "Cold in here, huh?" she said with a half smile, tugging at her cuff. He didn't answer. His gaze lingered a second too long, just enough for her to look away. That moment said more than either of them dared to voice. He started assigning her fewer late tasks, telling HR she'd been overloaded. It was the only excuse he could make without crossing professional lines. Every time he passed her desk, he caught that same distant expression, like she was here, but somewhere else entirely. Her silent longing to disappear tore at something he'd spent years keeping still. At night, when the building emptied, he stayed behind, pretending to finish work. But really, he was just waiting, to make sure she made it home safe, to hear the elevator close, to breathe again when the lights went out. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet obsession was about to cost him his peace. She didn't show up on Monday or Tuesday. By Wednesday, HR said she was on personal leave, and Lucas didn't ask for details, but he wanted to. Every email unanswered felt heavier than the last. By Friday, her desk sat untouched, her mug still half full of cold coffee. The silence in that corner of the office was impossible to ignore. When she finally returned a week later, she looked different. No makeup, no ring. Her hair was tied back loosely, as if she hadn't cared enough to fix it. She smiled when she saw him. Small, practiced, tired. "Sorry for disappearing," she said softly. "Family stuff." He didn't believe her for a second. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone too careful. "Yeah," she lied. The conversation ended there, but the space between them filled with everything left unsaid. He noticed the faint bruise fading near her collarbone when she turned away, the kind that told more story than words ever could. That night, when the office lights dimmed and the last elevator chimed, Lucas sat at his desk staring at her name on the screen. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, that she'd been hurt, or that she still had to pretend she hadn't been. Somewhere deep down, a quiet decision was forming. People talk too much in offices. Gossip spreads faster than reports, and Ava's return was no exception. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Words like divorce and trouble floated behind fake smiles. Lucas never joined in. He just watched quietly, every time someone's curiosity became too sharp. The more they talked, the more he wanted to protect her. She worked differently now, efficient, quiet, precise. No small talk, no coffee breaks, just numbers and silence. He admired that discipline but hated what it meant. Pain teaches people to be efficient. Every time she passed his office, he noticed her posture. Strong on the outside, broken at the edges. That silent longing to disappear haunted him. One afternoon he heard someone joke about her bad taste in men. The laughter that followed made his chest tighten. He didn't say a word, but later that evening those same employees found themselves reassigned to other projects. He didn't need to raise his voice. Sometimes protection came dressed as authority. She stayed late again that week, working under the soft buzz of the ceiling lights. Lucas lingered by the glass wall, watching her reflection move. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe a sign she was okay. Maybe just an excuse to make sure she wasn't alone. When she finally noticed him, she smiled faintly. "Long day?" she asked. "Always," he replied. That night, when the office emptied, he sat in the dark for a while, staring at the skyline. Somewhere out there, her ex-husband was probably still walking free, drinking, pretending he hadn't destroyed something precious. Lucas clenched his jaw, realizing he'd been holding his breath. He couldn't fix her past, but he could damn well protect her present. So he made a silent promise, one no one would ever hear. No matter what it took, he'd keep her safe. From gossip, from her past, from the man who hurt her. He didn't know how yet, but it didn't matter. The decision was already made. And for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like control. It felt like purpose. Ava started staying late more often, not because she had to, but because it was easier than going home to an empty apartment. The office felt safer, quieter, predictable. Lucas stayed too, claiming deadlines and strategy calls as excuses. In reality, he just didn't like the idea of her walking out into the night alone. They developed a rhythm neither of them acknowledged. She'd bring him coffee without asking. He'd send her reports before she requested them. It was unspoken and a kind of truce built from exhaustion and mutual understanding. They rarely talked, but their silences started sounding less like distance and more like company. Sometimes he'd find her staring out the window after hours, the city lights painting her face in soft gold. "You should get some rest," he'd say. She'd nod, then keep staring. "I'll leave in a minute," she'd promise, and never did. He stopped insisting after a while. There was comfort in pretending they both had nowhere else to be. By the end of each long night, their reflections overlapped on the glass walls. Two people pretending not to notice the other. Lucas had built an empire out of control, but lately it was slipping one late evening at a time. He told himself it was harmless, but part of him knew better. It was one of those quiet nights where the office felt suspended in time. The hum of computers, the soft tapping of Ava's keyboard, the city lights flickering through the glass, everything looked perfectly normal. Lucas walked past her office, pausing just long enough to notice the faint smile she gave him. For a moment, he let himself believe that maybe the silence between them had finally settled into peace. Then he saw it. Movement outside, near the parking lot, a man leaning against a car, his body language too still, too deliberate. Lucas's instincts sharpened instantly. He didn't move closer to the window, didn't say a word, but his hand tightened around the edge of the doorframe as he watched the figure light a cigarette and glance up toward the building. When Ava gathered her things a few minutes later, Lucas tried to sound casual. "Leaving already?" he asked. She nodded, adjusting her bag. "Yeah, just want to get home." He hesitated, then said, "Take the front exit tonight." She frowned, confused, but didn't argue. The smallest things, her trust, her tone, mattered more than he'd ever admit. From his office, he watched her step into the elevator, unaware of the shadow waiting outside. The man's head turned again, this time following her movement behind the glass. Lucas felt that quiet promise he'd made come alive like fire in his chest. He didn't know who the man was yet, but something told him this wasn't going to stop here. The next morning, Lucas was already at his desk before sunrise. He hadn't slept much. The image of that man outside kept looping in his mind like a warning. The building's security report sat open on his laptop, timestamps matching the exact moment Ava left. It wasn't the first night the man had been there. It was the fifth. He called the head of security into his office, tone clipped and calm. "Pull all exterior footage from this week," he ordered. Minutes later, the screen filled with grainy clips, the same car, the same man, always watching, sometimes pacing, sometimes leaning against the door. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. "Find out who he is," Lucas said, voice low. By noon, the answer arrived in a sealed folder. Lucas didn't open it right away. He stared at it for a long moment, fingers pressed against the paper, as if part of him already knew. When he finally flipped it open, a single photo stared back. Ryan Carter, the ex-husband. The name made his jaw tighten so hard it hurt. He remembered the day Ava came back to work after her personal leave. The tired smile, the bruise she tried to hide, the ring that was suddenly gone. He'd known she was hurting, but this was different. This was danger, disguised as persistence. A man who didn't understand what no meant. Lucas leaned back, forcing himself to breathe. The security chief cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, do you want me to alert her?" Lucas shook his head immediately. "No, not yet. I'll handle it." He didn't trust anyone else with this, not when it came to her. He wasn't sure what "handle it" meant yet, but whatever it was, it wouldn't involve waiting. Later that afternoon, he saw Ava in the hallway, arms full of files, laughing softly with a co-worker. She looked normal, calm, completely unaware that her past was waiting outside every night. He studied her for a moment too long before forcing his expression back to neutral. She deserved peace, not panic. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Lucas stood by the window overlooking the city. Below, the same car was parked under the streetlight, engine off, headlights dimmed. Ryan Carter was out there again, and Lucas finally knew his name. The last of his hesitation disappeared. He wasn't just her boss anymore. He was the line Ryan wasn't going to cross. When Ava stepped into the office that morning, she sensed something different. Lucas wasn't his usual composed self. His expression carried a stillness that didn't match the calm of the room. "Can you close the door?" he said quietly. She obeyed, setting the folder in her hands on the desk, waiting for him to speak. His eyes didn't leave hers. "You're being watched." The words hit harder than she expected, though a small part of her didn't look surprised. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. He continued, measured and calm. "I saw him outside last night. Security confirmed it. He's been there before." Ava's fingers curled against the edge of the desk. "Ryan," she whispered, the name tasting bitter in her mouth. Lucas nodded, jaw tightening. "You knew." It wasn't an accusation, more a quiet realization. She nodded once, eyes lowering. "He calls sometimes, follows me. I thought if I ignored him, he'd stop." She tried to smile, but her voice cracked halfway through. "Guess that was stupid." He shook his head immediately. "No, that was survival." For a moment, silence filled the room. Heavy, real, almost intimate. He wanted to say more, to tell her she wasn't alone, but stopped himself. She didn't need pity. She needed safety. Finally, he said softly, "Let me take care of this." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Why?" Her voice trembled just slightly. He hesitated before answering. "Because someone should have done it a long time ago." The sky broke open just as the workday ended. Rain poured down in sheets, drumming against the glass walls of the office. Most employees had already rushed out, umbrellas colliding in the lobby. Ava, however, hesitated by her desk, staring at the storm outside. Lucas watched from his doorway, his gut twisting with unease. Something about the air felt wrong. She moved quickly, tucking her files into her bag, pulling her coat tight. "See you tomorrow," she said, her voice lighter than her eyes. Lucas forced a smile, nodding. The elevator doors closed, and a hollow silence followed. He tried to return to his reports but couldn't focus. Every instinct told him not to let her leave alone tonight. By the time he grabbed his keys, she was already halfway to her car. The rain had blurred everything. Streetlights turned into streaks of gold. Lucas slipped into his car, headlights off, keeping distance as he followed. He wasn't proud of it, but this wasn't about pride. It was about the sick feeling that history was about to repeat itself. Ava drove cautiously, windshield wipers fighting the downpour. She kept glancing at her rearview mirror, though she didn't know why. Old habits from fear never die quietly. When she turned into the street near her apartment, the road ahead was empty, too empty. Then she saw it, a dark figure leaning against a lamppost, waiting. Lucas's heart pounded when he saw the same silhouette, Ryan Carter. Even through the rain, his posture was unmistakable, arrogant, unbothered, drunk on confidence. Lucas parked a few cars behind, stepping into the storm without an umbrella. He moved fast, quiet, his eyes locked on the man who had once made her flinch in daylight. Ava froze when Ryan called her name. "You thought you could just leave me?" he slurred, his words sharp with anger. "After everything I did for you." She took a step back, her voice trembling. "Go home, Ryan. Please." The plea only made him laugh, louder, meaner. He took a step forward, but before he could reach her, another voice cut through the rain. "Step away from her." Lucas's tone was steady, lethal. Ryan turned, startled, his smirk fading when he saw who it was. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Lucas didn't answer. He moved closer until he stood between them, his soaked suit clinging to his frame. "The man who's going to make sure you never touch her again." For the first time that night, Ryan took a step back. Ryan's smirk returned for a brief second, masking his unease. "Oh, the boss, huh? Playing the hero now?" His voice slurred, but his words carried venom. He tried to step around Lucas, but Lucas moved with quiet precision, blocking his path. "I said step away," he repeated, each word cutting sharper than the rain. The air between them buzzed with danger. Ava's breath caught as Ryan's hand twitched, like he might grab her again. "Don't," Lucas warned, his voice dropping lower. Calm, deadly. "You're drunk, and you've already lost more than you realize." Ryan laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think you can protect her forever? You'll get bored like everyone else does." His words were meant to sting, but they only fueled Lucas's resolve. Ryan lunged forward, clumsy but angry. Lucas sidestepped effortlessly, catching his arm before it reached Ava. The movement was quick, controlled. Not aggression, but restraint. "You're done," Lucas said, his grip steady as stone. Ryan's bravado cracked, his glare faltering. "She's mine," he spat. But the words sounded hollow now. "No," Lucas replied. "She's free." At that moment, headlights flooded the street. Security had arrived, called discreetly by Lucas's team the minute he'd left the office. 2 guards stepped out of the car, rain bouncing off their shoulders. Ryan froze, realizing the scene was no longer his to control. "Escort him out," Lucas ordered evenly. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried authority that silenced everything else. As the guards pulled Ryan away, his voice broke into desperate shouts, her name over and over, fading as he was dragged toward the waiting car. Ava stood frozen, raindrops clinging to her lashes. She didn't speak, didn't move. Lucas turned to her, his voice soft now. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head slowly, her lips trembling. "No, not this time." Lucas took a breath, the tension in his shoulders finally breaking. He turned to one of the guards, lowering his voice. "This stays between us. No reports, no rumors. Not a word to anyone in the company." The guard nodded firmly. Lucas's gaze returned to Ava, his tone gentler now. "Let's get you out of the rain." She didn't argue. For the first time, she let someone else lead her away. The car was silent, except for the rhythmic beat of the rain on the windshield. Ava sat staring out the window, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Lucas drove without speaking, his jaw still tense, the echo of Ryan's voice lingering somewhere in his mind. He glanced at her briefly. She looked small, fragile, but not broken. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "I didn't want anyone to see me like that," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. "Pity feels worse than fear sometimes." Lucas nodded slowly, understanding more than he wanted to admit. "I don't pity you," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Good," she replied, managing the faintest smile, "because I couldn't handle that tonight." They drove for a few minutes without another word. The city lights blurred through the rain, smearing gold and red across the glass. Finally, Lucas said, "You're staying somewhere safe tonight." She shook her head immediately. "I can't." He cut her off gently, eyes still on the road. "It's not a suggestion." His calmness carried more weight than any argument could. Ava sighed, turning her face back to the window. "You always like being in control, don't you?" she said softly. Lucas smiled for the first time that night. Small, tired, real. "Only when it matters," she exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless, like the kind of storm that cleans more than it destroys. By the time they reached her building, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Ava reached for the handle, but Lucas locked the doors first. "You shouldn't stay here tonight," he said, calm but firm. She frowned, exhausted. "Lucas, I can't keep running. This is my home." He turned to her, his voice low. "Home isn't supposed to hurt." She looked away, her reflection trembling in the car window. "He keeps showing up," she whispered. "I thought it would stop after the divorce." Lucas didn't move, his hand resting on the steering wheel. "It won't. Not until he knows you're not alone." The words hung between them, heavier than the rain. She turned toward him slowly. "And am I?" He met her eyes, the faint streetlight glinting across his face. "Not anymore." His voice was quiet, but it carried a conviction she hadn't heard in years. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The storm outside had faded, but inside the car, something else had begun, a silence charged with meaning, one that neither dared to name. Finally, he unlocked the doors, breaking the spell. "Pack a bag," he said. "Just essentials." She hesitated, searching his face for something, a reason, a promise. What she found instead was certainty. "All right," she said softly, opening the door. The sound of her heels on the pavement was the only thing that answered him. Ava returned a few minutes later, a small suitcase in hand. Her hair was damp, her movements quick, not from fear, but exhaustion. She didn't say much as she got back into the car, just a quiet, "Thank you." Lucas nodded once, starting the engine. The city outside felt distant now, a blur of muted lights and sleepless streets. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, full of unspoken things. Ava finally broke it. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "I've caused enough trouble already." Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "This isn't trouble," he replied. "It's responsibility." She turned to look at him, frowning slightly. "You mean because I work for you?" He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. "Let's say it started that way," he said quietly. "But not everything stays professional forever." She didn't press him. She didn't need to. The look in his eyes told her everything, the kind of silent longing that builds over years of restraint. It scared her a little how safe that made her feel. When they stopped at a red light, she spoke again. "So what happens now?" He glanced at her, calm but unwavering. "Now," he said, "I handle it." There was no arrogance in his tone, just certainty. She wanted to ask what that meant, but something in his expression told her not to. And for the first time in a long while, she believed someone when they said they'd protect her. By Monday morning, Reed Industries ran smoother than usual because Lucas had quietly rearranged everything. A new company car was assigned to Ava for safety, though officially it was for client meetings. The security team received new instructions that didn't need explanations. No one questioned him. He was the kind of man whose decisions never needed justification. But this one wasn't business. Ava didn't protest. Not really. She rolled her eyes when he handed her the key fob, muttering, "You really think I need an escort to work?" Lucas smirked faintly. "Think of it as a promotion benefit." The humor softened her suspicion, but she caught the way his expression shifted when she mentioned driving home alone. He wasn't just cautious, he was worried. Later that day, he reviewed footage from the building's entrance under the excuse of operations oversight. Ryan hadn't appeared again, yet. Lucas watched every second anyway. It wasn't obsession, he told himself, just insurance. The truth, though, was simpler and harder to admit. He didn't sleep well unless he knew she was safe. Each night, he stayed later than usual, pretending to work as Ava finished her reports. Sometimes she caught him glancing up from his desk. "You're still here?" she'd tease lightly. "Apparently so are you," he'd reply. The quiet between them had changed again, no longer awkward, no longer tense, just steady, like two people who had silently agreed that neither was going anywhere. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that began with coffee, quiet chatter, and the sound of printers. Ava was in a meeting when the call came from security. "Sir, there's a man in the lobby asking for Ms. Bennett." Lucas's pulse spiked instantly. He didn't ask who. He already knew. "Keep him there," he said, his voice turning cold. "I'm on my way." The elevator ride down felt endless. By the time the doors opened, the lobby had gone still. Employees lingered near the front desk, whispering, sensing something off, and there he was, Ryan Carter, eyes bloodshot, his shirt untucked, his smirk unfazed. "You must be the famous boss," he sneered when Lucas approached. "Mind telling me why my wife isn't taking my calls?" Lucas stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "She's not your wife anymore." The words hung like ice in the air. Ryan stepped closer, mocking. "You think you can protect her? You think she needs you?" His tone was loud enough for half the lobby to hear. Lucas didn't flinch, but something in his jaw shifted, the last thread of patience unraveling. Ava's heels clicked behind him just then. She'd seen the scene from the hallway and rushed down. "Ryan, please stop," she said, her voice trembling. "You're embarrassing yourself." That only made him laugh harder. "Embarrassing myself? No, sweetheart, you're the one crawling back to another man already." His words stung like poison. Lucas moved before he even thought. He stepped between them, voice low, steady, lethal. "That's enough." Ryan shoved his shoulder lightly, testing him. "A mistake. Lucas's hand shot out, gripping his arm firmly, not violently, but with a quiet warning. You need to leave, now. Security moved closer, but Lucas didn't look away. It wasn't rage in his eyes. It was precision, a controlled fury born from years of silence. Ryan opened his mouth to speak again, but the look on Lucas's face stopped him. You're trespassing, Lucas said quietly. One more word, and this becomes police business. For the first time, Ryan hesitated, his smirk faltering. He pulled his arm free, muttering something under his breath as security closed in. Ava stood frozen behind Lucas, wide-eyed, her breathing unsteady, and as Ryan was escorted out, she finally whispered, You didn't have to do that. Lucas turned to her, his voice low. Yes, I did. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that began with coffee, quiet chatter, and the sound of printers. Ava was in a meeting when the call came from security. Sir, there's a man in the lobby asking for Ms. Bennett. Lucas's pulse spiked instantly. He didn't ask who, he already knew. Keep him there, he said, his voice turning cold. I'm on my way. The elevator ride down felt endless. By the time the doors opened, the lobby had gone still. Employees lingered near the front desk, whispering, sensing something off. And there he was, Ryan Carter, eyes bloodshot, his shirt untucked, his smirk unfazed. You must be the famous boss, he sneered when Lucas approached. Mind telling me why my wife isn't taking my calls? Lucas stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. She's not your wife anymore. The words hung like ice in the air. Ryan stepped closer, mocking. You think you can protect her? You think she needs you? His tone was loud enough for half the lobby to hear. Lucas didn't flinch, but something in his jaw shifted, the last thread of patience unraveling. Ava's heels clicked behind him just then. She'd seen the scene from the hallway and rushed down. Ryan, please stop, she said, her voice trembling. You're embarrassing yourself. That only made him laugh harder. Embarrassing myself? No, sweetheart. You're the one crawling back to another man already. His words stung like poison. Lucas moved before he even thought. He stepped between them, voice low, steady, lethal. That's enough. Ryan shoved his shoulder lightly, testing him. A mistake. Lucas's hand shot out, gripping his arm firmly. Not violently, but with a quiet warning. You need to leave, now. Security moved closer, but Lucas didn't look away. It wasn't rage in his eyes. It was precision, a controlled fury born from years of silence. Ryan opened his mouth to speak again, but the look on Lucas's face stopped him. Oh, you're trespassing, Lucas said quietly. One more word and this becomes police business. For the first time, Ryan hesitated, his smirk faltering. He pulled his arm free, muttering something under his breath as security closed in. Ava stood frozen behind Lucas, wide-eyed, her breathing unsteady, and as Ryan was escorted out, she finally whispered, You didn't have to do that. Lucas turned to her, his voice low. Yes, I did. The building's glass doors closed behind them, shutting out the chaos of the lobby. Ava still hadn't spoken since the confrontation. Lucas guided her toward the car, his hand hovering near her back without ever touching. The silence between them was thick, not awkward but heavy with adrenaline and something else neither wanted to name. You're not going home, he finally said. She turned to him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. Lucas, I can't just... You can, he interrupted softly. And you will, I'm not asking. His tone wasn't cold, just resolute. For the first time she didn't argue. Maybe she was too tired to fight, or maybe she was finally ready to stop pretending she didn't need help. The drive was quiet. City lights reflected on the windshield as the car climbed toward the higher part of downtown. Ava watched the skyline pass by, her reflection faint in the window, fragile but unbroken. Where are we going? She asked eventually. Somewhere you'll sleep for once, he replied. It wasn't a threat or an order. It was a promise. When the elevator doors opened, her breath caught. The penthouse looked like another world. Floor-to-ceiling glass, clean lines, the city glowing beneath them. This is temporary, Lucas said quickly, almost defensive. You'll stay here until I sort things out. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the space that felt more like a fortress than a home. You live here? She asked. He hesitated. Upstairs. For a moment she didn't respond. The idea that he lived just one floor above her should have made her uneasy, but it didn't. Instead, it made her feel safe. He walked her through the apartment, pointing out the guest room, the kitchen, the view. There was no tension in his tone, just quiet certainty. Everything about him said control, but everything about the moment said care. Before he left, He paused at the doorway. "There's fresh coffee in the kitchen. You'll need it tomorrow." She smiled faintly, the first real one in days. "You really think coffee fixes everything?" He looked at her for a long second, the corner of his mouth lifting. "It's a start." Then he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the quiet hum of the penthouse, leaving her with warmth she hadn't expected to feel again. The city glowed beneath them, lights flickering like restless stars. Ava couldn't sleep. She found herself in the living room, wrapped in one of Lucas's spare blankets, staring at the skyline through the glass. When he walked in, still dressed from the day, she didn't flinch. "You don't rest either, huh?" she said quietly. "Not when there's too much to think about," he replied, settling across from her. For a long moment they just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the city below. Then Ava asked the question that had been circling her mind since the night he showed up in the rain. "Why do you care so much?" Her tone wasn't accusing. It was tired, curious. Lucas didn't look at her right away. "Because I've known you longer than you think," he said finally, his voice steady but softer than she'd ever heard. She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly, like someone caught halfway between truth and hesitation. "Let's just say you made an impression a long time ago." She studied his face, searching for the meaning behind the words, but he didn't offer more. There was something about the way he said it, calm, deliberate, that made her heart skip a beat. They stayed like that for a while, two people with too many secrets and not enough courage to share them. The clock ticked softly in the background, the city breathing below. When Ava finally looked away, she whispered, "It feels strange. Being safe again." Lucas nodded, eyes on the horizon. "You'll get used to it," he said quietly. "I'll make sure of that." The sun filtered through the glass walls of the penthouse, soft and golden. Ava woke to the faint smell of coffee and the quiet hum of the city below. Lucas was already gone, probably at the office, early as always. She walked through the apartment slowly, her fingers grazing the marble counter, the shelves, the framed photos that decorated the hallway. That's when she saw it, a picture half hidden behind a stack of files on his desk. It was old, the colors slightly faded. A group of college students stood in front of a campus building, smiling for the camera. Her breath caught. She knew that face. Hers, younger, brighter, carefree. And behind her, slightly out of focus, stood Lucas Reed, looking exactly the same way he did now. Composed, quiet, watching. It wasn't coincidence. It was memory made real. Ava sat down slowly, the picture trembling slightly in her hands. She'd forgotten that photo existed, forgotten that time entirely. But he hadn't. All at once, his strange familiarity, his calm presence, the way he seemed to know her rhythms, it all made sense. He hadn't just known her longer than she thought. He'd loved her longer than she could imagine. She turned the frame around, searching for a date. 10 years ago, 10 years of silence, of distance, of unspoken love, hidden behind success and structure. The realization hit her with both warmth and sadness. "All this time," she murmured to the empty room, her voice barely a whisper. "You remembered me." When Lucas returned later that morning, she was still sitting by his desk, the photo resting between her fingers. He froze when he saw it. No words were needed. The truth was already out. She met his gaze, a soft, trembling smile forming on her lips. "You meant that kind of impression, didn't you?" His answer came quiet, almost fragile. "Yeah, I did. I used to sit 2 rows behind you," Lucas said quietly, leaning against the edge of his desk. "You never looked back." His tone wasn't bitter. It was nostalgic, gentle. "You were always surrounded by people, laughter, and I was the guy who didn't know how to speak without overthinking every word." Ava listened, eyes fixed on him, her fingers brushing the photo again. "And yet you remembered me," she whispered. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from years of restraint. "I remembered everything, the way you carried yourself, the way you treated people. You were light in a room that didn't have much of it. I told myself I'd move on, and I did mostly. Built a life, built this company. But when you walked into my office that day," his voice trailed off, heavy with memory. "It felt like time never passed at all." Ava's eyes softened, glimmering with a mix of sadness and something new. "All this time you never said anything." Lucas shook his head slowly. "You were married. You were happy, or I wanted to believe you were, so I stayed quiet." He took a slow breath. "But when I saw what he did to you, I promised myself that silence would never be my answer again." The room fell still, every word settling like truth between them. The air between them felt heavier now, charged with everything left unsaid. Ava stood slowly, the photo still in her hand, her pulse echoing louder than the city outside. Lucas hadn't moved, but his eyes followed her. Steady, patient, uncertain. Neither spoke. Some moments don't need dialogue, they only need truth. When she stopped in front of him, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when both people realize what's always been there. "You could have told me," she said softly. "Would it have changed anything?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not then, but now." Her voice trembled with something new, trust. He didn't reach for her first. She did. A tentative touch to his collar, her fingers brushing against the damp fabric of his shirt from the earlier rain. He inhaled sharply, as if remembering to breathe for the first time. And then she kissed him. Not desperate, not rushed, but slow, certain, inevitable. The kind of kiss that feels less like beginning and more like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, neither said a word. The city lights reflected off the window behind them, flickering like the heartbeat of something that had been waiting years to live again. Lucas rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed, voice barely above a whisper. No more silence. Ava nodded, her lips curving into a small, peaceful smile. No more pretending. Months later, the office felt different, calmer, lighter, alive in ways it hadn't been before. Ava's laughter echoed through the glass halls again, the kind that made people smile without knowing why. She still worked late, out of habit, and Lucas still found excuses to stay behind. But now no one pretended not to notice. Some stories don't need to be hidden anymore. They worked side by side, a rhythm that came naturally after everything they'd survived. Sometimes their hands brushed while passing papers. Sometimes they exchanged small glances across meetings that said everything words couldn't. There was no secrecy, no tension, just quiet understanding. She was no longer his employee first. She was his piece. Outside, the city moved as it always had, restless, loud, unpredictable. Yet for them, time seemed to slow down in the small moments. A shared coffee, a look across the room, a hand lingering on the elevator door so the other wouldn't walk alone. The man who once built walls for safety had finally learned that love didn't require them. One evening, as the lights dimmed and the office emptied, Ava walked toward him, her steps soft against the floor. "You're still here," she teased. He smiled, standing to meet her. "So are you." Their reflections merged on the glass once again, no longer divided by distance or fear. Just two people who finally turned around to find each other. Months turned into a year, and the chaos of that night became nothing more than a distant memory. The apartment that once felt temporary now looked lived in. Warm light spilling from the kitchen, the soft sound of jazz playing in the background. Ava moved easily through the space, barefoot, her hair tied loosely. Lucas sat at the table, half listening, half admiring, like a man who still couldn't believe he got to come home to her. At the office, things had changed too. The whispers that once followed her name had faded, replaced by quiet respect. A new assistant joined the team, sharp, older, efficient. Lucas treated her with the same professionalism, though sometimes when she caught him watching Ava from across the room, she smiled knowingly. Some stories don't need retelling, they just echo in different forms. Their lives weren't perfect. There were deadlines, disagreements, days too long for comfort. But they were theirs, and in the quiet between those moments, in the glances shared over morning coffee or the brief touches in the elevator, love existed without noise or fear. It didn't need to prove itself anymore. It simply stayed. One evening, Ava found an old photo on his desk again, the same one from college. This time it was framed properly, sitting beside a new one of them together. She smiled, running her fingers along the edge of the frame. "You still keep it here?" she asked. Lucas looked up, his voice low but sure, always, and for the first time, it didn't sound like memory. It sounded like forever. Some loves don't start with a grand gesture. They begin quietly in the moments no one sees. Lucas and Ava's story wasn't about rescue, it was about recognition. Two souls who kept finding each other across time, pain, and silence, until love finally stopped waiting. Have you ever met someone who changed your story without even realizing it? Someone who made you feel safe just by being there? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be closer to this one than you think. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Someone out there might need this reminder tonight. And if you believe in love that takes its time, stay with us, because the next story might be yours.